My name is Margaret Walker. I'm 68. I just buried my husband last Saturday. His name was Robert. We were married for 43 years, lived in the same house for almost that long, raised a son together, planted tomatoes every spring. Now it's just me, and a silence I don't know how to carry. The service was held at Grace Chapel, the same place Robert and I renewed our vows on our 25th anniversary. It was packed. Former students, neighbors, old coaching buddies, people I hadn't seen in decades, came to say goodbye. They shook my hand, offered condolences, told me stories about how Robert had touched their lives. He was the kind of man who remembered names and birthdays and who fixed leaky faucets for neighbors without being asked. I stood there in navy blue, his favorite color on me, holding a tissue that had long since given up. I held it together through the eulogies, through the choir, even through placing a single white rose on the casket. I nodded politely, hugged tightly, accepted every murmured prayer and every warm palm placed against my back. But the whole time, I felt like I was moving through fog, like something inside me had gone quiet in a way that wasn't going to come back. At the reception afterward, I wandered like a ghost. The fellowship hall smelled of coffee and carpet cleaner. People stood in polite clumps, eating lemon bars and telling stories I was too numb to follow. I needed air, or maybe I needed a moment to fall apart without witnesses. I slipped away through a side hallway past a door with frosted glass and into what looked like an old Sunday school room. I didn't turn on the light. I just sank into a chair by the window, stared at my trembling hands, and let the tears fall where they wanted. That's when I heard the voices. The door creaked open just a little and I froze. I didn't want company. I thought about standing announcing myself, but something stopped me. The voices were familiar. One of them was Emily's, my daughter-in-law, always so polished, always smiling too tightly. Her heels clicked against the floor as she stepped in. "We need to move this along." Her voice was sharp, low, but unmistakable. I leaned back just a bit, staying hidden behind a bookshelf stacked with hymnals and folded chairs. I shouldn't have eavesdropped, I know, but I also know that what I heard wasn't meant for kindness. "She's next." That's what she said. I nearly stopped breathing. "She's next. We'll get the paperwork going by next week. Robert's gone. Kyle agrees we need to do what's best." There was a pause, a softer voice. Probably my son Kyle. I couldn't make out every word, just pieces. I think he said something like, "Not today," or "She's grieving." But he didn't disagree. He didn't say no. He didn't say, "Stop." I sat still as stone. My hands clutched the sides of the chair, nails digging into the worn fabric. The woman who brought me a tray of sandwiches this morning was now planning to remove me from my own home, the home Robert and I built together. She wasn't grieving, she was calculating, and my son, my only son, was letting her. I stayed there long after the door closed again, staring at the wall, feeling like something had split open in my chest. I thought the worst pain would be losing Robert, but this betrayal slid in like ice. Robert had said he took care of everything. I had no idea what he meant, but in that moment, I prayed to God that he had seen this coming, because I hadn't. The house felt too quiet when I walked in, the kind of silence that sits heavy on your chest. I didn't take off my coat. I just stood in the doorway for a while, holding my purse like I didn't know where to set it down. There was a time when Robert would have met me at the door. He'd take my hand, help me out of my shoes, ask how it went. Now it was just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint scent of lemon from the morning's cleaning. I dropped my keys into the dish by the door, the sound startling in the stillness. The living room looked untouched, almost staged. His recliner sat just where he left it, with his reading glasses perched on the armrest and a half-empty mug of tea nearby. I walked past it slowly, like approaching something sacred. My eyes fell on the coffee table. His crossword puzzle lay there, one square unfinished. The pen was resting perfectly against it, like he'd just stepped away and would be back to fill it in. I sank down onto the edge of the couch. That one word, that one empty square, it felt like everything left unsaid between us. I picked up the pen, my hand trembling. I didn't write anything. I just held it like maybe it would bring him back. I looked around the room. The photographs on the wall blurred behind my tears. Our wedding day, Kyle's high school graduation, that beach trip to Oregon where Robert insisted on carrying the cooler even with his bad knee. I used to think the house held our life. Now it felt like it was holding my breath. I wandered into the kitchen. The dish towel he liked still hung from the oven handle crooked. He always fixed it. I never noticed until now how many things he quietly corrected, how many little ways he made the space feel steady. I touched the counter, then moved to the spice rack he built for me, one Christmas. Each shelf cut and sanded by hand. He made it because I once said I couldn't reach the store-bought one. That was Robert. He never said much, but he listened. I opened the fridge, stared at the leftover casserole someone had dropped off, closed it again. The hunger I felt wasn't the kind food could touch. It sat deeper, somewhere under the ribs next to the ache. Upstairs, our bedroom door creaked like always. The floor groaned when I stepped across it the way it always had. I ran my hand along the dresser over the pile of folded handkerchiefs Robert kept on his side. His watch was still there. I sat on the bed, picked it up, pressed the face to my palm. It had stopped. Of course it had. So had everything else. His cardigan still hung on the back of the chair, the one he wore to Sunday brunch. I buried my face in it, pulled it tight around my shoulders. It still smelled like him, like cedar and something warm I couldn't name. I didn't cry then. I was past tears, I think. I just sat there wrapped in memory. I looked at his nightstand. There was a little wooden box with a notepad inside, the same pad he used for grocery lists and reminders. On top of it was a note in his handwriting. One line: I've taken care of everything. He said the same thing to me the day before he passed. I was holding his hand. He was having one of his clear moments. He looked at me and said it like a promise. At the time, I thought he meant the funeral arrangements. I told him not to worry, that I'd manage. Now I wasn't so sure. I sat back against the headboard. His side of the bed was made still tucked tight from the last time I changed the sheets. I didn't know what he meant when he said he'd taken care of everything. But sitting there, hearing Emily's voice in my head again, hearing her say I was next, something started to shift. Robert knew things. He always had. He noticed patterns, noticed people. He used to tell me when he thought someone wasn't being honest, even if they smiled to your face. I used to tease him about it, told him he was too suspicious. But maybe he wasn't wrong. What if he knew this would happen? What if he saw it coming? I got up and walked through the hallway, touching the photos as I passed. One of me and Robert at a pumpkin patch, laughing with our faces smeared with pie. One of him and Kyle building a birdhouse. I paused in front of that one. Kyle was 12 in the photo. He looked so proud. That boy would have fought for me back then. I didn't recognize the man I heard in the funeral home. Back downstairs, I poured a glass of water and stood at the window. The garden was quiet. The bird feeder Robert filled every weekend hung empty now. I'd have to learn how to fill it myself. But I didn't mind that part. It was the part where I might not get the chance. I kept hearing Emily's voice, "We'll get the paperwork started." That cold certainty in her tone, the way Kyle didn't interrupt. I pressed my palm against the window pane. The glass was cool solid, so was I. I just hadn't realized it yet. Robert said he took care of everything. I needed to find out what he meant, because if they thought I would go quietly, they didn't know me at all. The doorbell rang just after 10. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I already knew who it was. I peeked through the window and saw Emily standing there, perfectly pressed, in a black coat holding a casserole dish like it was a peace offering. I opened the door, my hands still damp from rinsing the morning dishes. Her smile was bright and wide, too much for a Tuesday. She stepped in without waiting for an invitation and kissed my cheek, like we hadn't just buried Robert 3 days ago. "I brought you some baked ziti," she said, her voice sweet as frosting. "I know it's hard cooking for one." She set it down on the kitchen counter, opened the foil a little too quickly, like she needed me to see the effort. "That's thoughtful of you," I said, matching her tone. I didn't move to thank her more than that. I just watched her scan the room like she was taking inventory. "You still keep your spices in this cabinet?" she said, tugging open the door Robert built for me, the year after Kyle was born. The shelves creaked just a little, same as always. She stared inside like the jars said something about me. "It's just a bit tight in here, don't you think?" She didn't wait for an answer. I've seen some beautiful kitchens lately, open layouts, newer appliances, all accessible, very modern. I wiped my hands on a towel and leaned against the counter. It's worked fine for 30 years. Robert made that shelf for me when I couldn't reach the top one. Her smile faltered, but she recovered quick. "Of course," she said. "It's just now that you're alone, things might be harder. Little tasks, groceries, stairs." She pulled a folded brochure from her purse, sliding it across the table like it was nothing. "There's a community just 20 minutes out, private units, staff on site, activities. It's actually quite nice." Kyle and I took a tour. I didn't touch the paper. I just looked at her. My coffee hadn't even cooled and she was already deciding where I should be next. I kept my voice level. "I'm not ready to leave my home, Emily." "No one's saying right this minute," she said, hands fluttering. "It's just good to plan ahead." Her smile returned, but this time it didn't reach her eyes. She began tidying things that didn't need tidying, adjusting placemats, wiping a spot that wasn't there. I stood still. I wasn't going to give her anything more than what I'd already said. This house, she said softly, almost like to herself. It must be full of memories. That kind of space can start to feel heavy. It feels like mine, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it landed. Her shoulders tightened. Well, we just want what's best for you, she said, backing toward the door. You've done so much for this family. Now it's your turn to rest. I nodded just barely. I'll rest when I'm ready. She left with a smile, but the quiet after she was gone felt louder than any goodbye. I picked up the brochure from the table. My name wasn't anywhere on it, neither was Robert's, but their plan was clear. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought kindness could cover calculation, but I'd seen enough to know the difference. Emily walked over to the pantry and pulled open the door like she owned it. She scanned the shelves, her eyes moving over the cans and spices, and gave a tight little nod. This could definitely use some reorganizing, she said lightly, almost like it was a compliment. She reached for a stack of old cookie tins I hadn't touched since Christmas. These should probably go. I've seen articles about how clutter adds stress, especially for seniors. Her tone was gentle, but each word landed like a judgment. I moved slowly, taking the tin from her hand and placing it back. I like it the way it is, I said. She smiled, but I saw her fingers twitch like she was holding back from adjusting something else. She turned to the stove and glanced down at the knobs. Are these still working properly? Some of the newer models have safer features. She ran a hand across the countertop like she was already planning to rip it out and start fresh. Robert cleaned them himself last month, I replied. They're fine. Her smile wavered again. You know, she said, it's not about judgment. It's about making things easier for you, safer, more manageable. That word hung in the air. I stepped between her and the cabinets. I've managed this kitchen just fine for 30 years. Robert and I cooked every Sunday right here. This space works for me. She looked around, her eyes lingering on the old linoleum and the mismatched coffee mugs on the drying rack. I could almost hear her thoughts. Outdated, inefficient, a burden waiting to happen. She picked up the brochure again and held it out like a peace flag. I know change is hard, but there's a lovely one-bedroom with a walk-in shower and on-site nurses. Meals included, transportation, a community of people your age. I folded the towel in my hands, slow and deliberate. What you're describing sounds like a place for someone who can't care for themselves. That's not me, not yet. Emily's expression tightened. Her voice dropped just a little. Kyle and I are just looking ahead, making responsible choices. There's nothing wrong with that. I stared at her. You're not thinking about my needs. You're thinking about your convenience. For a moment, she didn't speak. Then she turned back to the counter and straightened the edge of the placemat that didn't need fixing. I just thought you might want a simpler life, less to handle. This life is mine, and simple isn't always better. She flinched slightly, then turned and gave me that same polished smile. Well, if you change your mind, we'll be here to help. She grabbed her purse, the casserole still sitting untouched on the stove. I walked her to the door without another word. As it closed behind her, I looked back at my kitchen. It wasn't perfect. The faucet dripped sometimes, the tiles were cracked near the sink. But it was mine. And for the first time since Robert passed, I realized I wasn't scared of being alone. I was scared of losing what I still had left. Control, memory, voice. Emily hadn't come to help, she came to take, and I wasn't going to let her. I stared at the brochure Emily had left on the table. Its glossy surface caught the afternoon light like a quiet threat. I pushed it aside and reached for the phone. Dr. Howard had been our family doctor for over 25 years. He was there when Kyle got his first asthma attack, when Robert pulled his back shoveling snow when I needed stitches after slipping on the porch. His voice came through the receiver on the second ring, warm and steady. Margaret, he said, and something in the way he said my name made the weight in my chest ease just a little. How are you holding up? I hesitated, unsure how much truth I could carry into this call. Managing, I said, but I need to ask you something. Something a little strange. There was a pause, the quiet space he always gave his patients to gather their words. Did Robert ever talk to you about me? About what he wanted for me after my voice cracked on the last word? The silence that followed wasn't heavy, it was thoughtful. Yes, Dr. Howard said softly, he did. I sat down, heart pounding. He continued, Robert asked me to do a full wellness evaluation on you quietly. He wanted to be sure no one would pressure you into leaving your home if you were still capable of staying. Tears blurred my vision, but they didn't fall. I remembered the look in Robert's eyes when he told me he had taken care of everything. I didn't understand then, but now I did. And I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, "You passed every check, Margaret. No signs of cognitive decline, strong mobility, independent function in all daily activities. There is no medical reason whatsoever for you to be relocated." A sound escaped me, then something between a breath and a sob. Relief surged through me like warm water, not just because I was healthy, but because Robert had seen what I hadn't. He knew what might come, and he made sure I wouldn't face it empty-handed. "Would you be willing to put that in writing?" I asked. "It's already written," he said. "Robert asked me to have it ready in case you ever needed it. I'll send it over this afternoon." "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you for everything." After I hung up, I stayed sitting for a long while. The light through the kitchen window cast a golden hue on the cabinets Robert built. Everything around me looked the same, but something inside me had changed. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't drifting. I had allies. I had proof. And I had Robert's foresight wrapped around me like a second skin. He had seen what they might try, and he had made sure I'd have a way to stand. The next morning, their car pulled into my driveway again. I watched from the window as Emily stepped out, first perfectly dressed, holding a folder. Kyle followed with his hands tucked in his coat pockets, face unreadable. I had already brewed a fresh pot of coffee and set out 3 mugs. I greeted them at the door with a calm smile, just like any other visit. But inside, I was standing taller than I had in weeks. "We just wanted to talk about a few practical things," Kyle said, settling into Robert's old recliner like it still belonged to him. Emily stayed standing, flipping open the folder as if she was running a meeting. She launched into her pitch, something about a community that offered independent living with medical staff on site and a calendar full of events. I listened without interrupting. Her tone was pleasant, measured, but every word felt like a move on a chessboard. Kyle nodded along occasionally, but his eyes kept darting toward mine, uncertain. When Emily paused to hand me another glossy brochure, I reached instead for a folded paper I had placed carefully on the coffee table. I slid it toward Kyle. "Before you go any further, you should read this." He took the paper slowly. Emily leaned in, trying to see. "That's from Dr. Howard," I said. "He's confirmed I'm in excellent health. No cognitive issues, no mobility concerns, no medical reason I can't live here on my own." Emily stiffened, her hand frozen mid-gesture. Kyle's eyes scanned the letter, his face flushing. I watched the shift happen. The practiced pitch, the momentum they thought they had, suddenly stalled. "I have support systems in place," I continued, "and I've invited someone here today who knows my health better than anyone besides Dr. Howard." The doorbell rang right on cue. I opened it to Sandra, Robert's home nurse from his final months. She stepped in with quiet confidence, nodding politely to Emily and Kyle. Her presence said more than any document ever could. She had seen who helped, who didn't, and who showed up only when decisions were to be made. "Sandra knows my routines, my needs, and my home. I trust her judgment. I wanted her here for this conversation." Emily sank slightly into her seat, the folder now clutched against her chest like armor. Kyle rubbed the back of his neck, saying nothing. I poured the coffee and handed them each a cup. The silence was thick, but not mine to break. For once, I wasn't the one being managed. I was the one setting the terms. "I appreciate your concern," I said, "but I'm not going anywhere. Robert and I talked about this before he passed. He wanted me safe, but he also wanted me respected." The room fell still. Emily looked toward Kyle, then back at me. Her voice when it came was thinner than usual. "Of course, we only wanted to help." "Help is listening," I said gently, not deciding for me. Sandra smiled, then just a little. The kind of smile you give someone who has finally remembered their own strength. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. I had everything I needed, and I had finally made it known. The front door opened mid-sentence. I turned and saw Olivia step inside, her backpack slung over one shoulder, and her braid damp from the morning drizzle. She froze when she saw Emily, Kyle, Sandra, and me all seated like some quiet tribunal. "Hey, am I interrupting something?" Her voice was cautious, but her eyes were already scanning the room, putting the pieces together. Kyle sat up straighter. Emily shifted uncomfortably, folding the brochure in half like she suddenly wanted it gone. "Not at all, sweetheart," I said. "We're just talking about some living arrangements." Her eyes landed on Emily, then on the open letter from Dr. Howard still on the coffee table. "Living arrangements?" Olivia blinked. "What's wrong with Grandma's arrangement? She was literally teaching me how to make homemade chicken pot pie last Thursday. Her voice didn't rise, but it was sharp enough to cut through the tension. Emily gave a tight smile. Olivia, these are adult discussions, more complicated than... I'm not a child, Mom, she said flatly. And Grandma is not someone you get to shuffle around like she's already gone. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she looked at me, then really looked. You're still the strongest person I know, Grandma. You walked me through college applications and showed me how to trim basil with scissors. Don't let anyone act like you're fading. My throat tightened. I hadn't expected her to walk in. I hadn't expected her to see so clearly. Sandra gave Olivia a small nod of approval. Kyle looked like he wanted to disappear into the chair. Emily said nothing. Her fingers tapped nervously against her coffee mug. Olivia dropped her backpack by the stairs and crossed the room to sit beside me. She reached for my hand. I took it steady, now strong in ways I hadn't realized until that moment. Let them talk, she said softly, but you decide, Grandma. You always get to decide. And in that instant, the ground beneath me felt solid again. I wasn't just standing up for myself anymore. I was standing with her beside me. The law office hadn't changed in years. Same burgundy carpet, same framed landscapes on the walls, same receptionist who greeted us with a soft voice and silver hair pinned neat. I sat between Kyle and Emily, both dressed in polite tension, pretending not to glance at the clock. Mr. Abrams stepped out from his office with a slight nod, his suit pressed and his tone gentle. He led us into the conference room where a dark wooden table waited under quiet lighting. We took our seats and the folder in front of him felt like it carried more than just paper. First, allow me to say how sorry I am for your loss, he said. Robert was not just a client, he was someone I respected deeply. Thank you, I said quietly, hands folded in my lap. I didn't look at Kyle or Emily. I didn't need to. He opened the folder and began reading through the will. The house, the joint accounts, the life insurance, all in my name. As Robert's wife, I would receive the bulk of what he left behind. Kyle nodded like he already expected this. Emily stayed very still. Then Mr. Abrams turned the page. There is, however, one specific clause added shortly before Robert's passing. He looked up at me. It pertains to the house on Linden Street. My breath caught, but I said nothing. In the event that Margaret Walker is removed from the residence against her will or coerced into relocation without medical justification provided in writing by two independent professionals, the property shall not transfer to Kyle Walker. He paused, letting the words settle. Instead, the property will be sold and the proceeds donated in full to the National Alzheimer's Foundation in memory of Robert's mother. The silence in the room deepened. Emily's mouth fell open slightly. Her hand twitched on the folder in front of her. That's absurd, she said, her voice sharp. He wouldn't do that to his own family. Mr. Abrams didn't blink. It was recorded and signed. He was of sound mind. Kyle looked down, face pale. I kept my hands folded, my shoulders straight. Robert had done what I could not. He had spoken from the grave with more strength than I'd ever dared in life. This is emotional blackmail, Emily whispered, but no one answered her. Mr. Abrams reached into the folder again. There are also personal letters, one for Margaret, one for Kyle. He handed them over gently. And for me, Emily asked. There was no letter for you, he said. I slipped the envelope with my name on it into my purse. I wasn't ready to read it yet. I needed silence and space and the scent of Robert's old sweater waiting back home. As we stepped into the hallway, Emily turned to Kyle with a hiss in her voice. He did this to punish us. But Kyle didn't answer. He looked like someone who had just remembered something important and didn't know what to do with it. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I still had the keys to my house, and now I had the words that would keep them in my hands. Mr. Abrams reached back into the folder and pulled out two sealed envelopes. He placed one in front of me, the other in front of Kyle. My name was written in Robert's hand, a little shaky but still familiar. Still him. The room went still, the kind of still that hums with everything unsaid. I picked up the letter and held it close to my chest, not ready to open it. And for me, Emily asked, her voice thin and brittle. Mr. Abrams looked at her, then slowly shook his head. I'm afraid there was no letter addressed to you. His voice stayed even, but the weight behind it said more than any reprimand. Emily's lips pressed together, pale and sharp. Her eyes dropped to the table, but not before I saw the sting settle there. This wasn't punishment. It was truth laid bare. I slipped the letter into my purse with careful fingers. It felt sacred somehow, private. I wanted to read it alone in the house we built surrounded by his things. Kyle looked down at his envelope like it might burn. Emily said nothing more. She just sat there smaller than I'd ever seen her, wrapped in silence she couldn't control. We left the office without another word. My steps felt heavier and lighter all at once. The kind of weight that comes not from burden but from meaning. The days that followed moved slower, but they moved with purpose. There was no more tension hovering in doorways or whispers behind my back. The house, once shadowed by grief and suspicion, began to breathe again. Olivia moved into the spare bedroom the week after her graduation. She brought boxes of books, piles of laundry, and a loud, honest kind of laughter that filled every corner. I found myself smiling more, especially when she danced through the kitchen humming songs I didn't know. We reorganized the pantry together, but left Robert's spice rack untouched. She offered to repaint the hallway, but when I told her Robert had picked the shade himself, she said it was perfect as it was. We added a handrail near the stairs and moved the laundry to the first floor just in case, but didn't change anything that made the place feel like home. Kyle began stopping by on weekends, always alone. He helped repair a loose porch board and fixed a stubborn drawer that had stuck for years. Sometimes we sat together quietly on the back steps, not needing to explain the silence between us. Emily stayed away. Her name rarely came up, and when it did, it slipped by like a leaf in water. I didn't ask questions. I let Kyle come to me when he was ready. One evening, he stood beside the rose bushes Robert had planted and told me he had read the letter. There were tears in his voice, even if they didn't fall. He said he had been listening to the wrong voice for too long. I reached for his hand and held it, not to forgive or to forget, but simply to show him I was still here. We are all capable of losing our way. What matters is if we learn to turn back. The days warmed and the scent of cut grass began to return. Olivia set up a small desk in the sunroom and worked late into the evening, her laptop glowing softly in the dark. I made tea and read next to her, comforted by the sound of keys tapping and her foot bouncing to a silent rhythm. On a quiet Friday night, we sat out on the back patio with no plan at all. The sky was streaked with lavender. Fireflies blinked between the hedges Robert had trimmed so carefully every spring. Olivia leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered that she could still hear his laugh in the garden. I nodded, eyes fixed on the shadows in the grass. I could too. That moment wasn't loud, it wasn't big, but it was full. We didn't need more than that. This wasn't about winning. It was about staying, about holding onto the spaces where love had lived and letting them bloom again quietly. The house was quiet that night, the kind of quiet that wraps around you like a warm shawl. I had made myself a cup of chamomile tea, but let it sit untouched on the nightstand. The envelope lay beside it, worn a little at the edges from how many times I'd picked it up and put it down. I sat on our bed still, with Robert's sweater folded neatly on the pillow next to mine. His scent lingered faintly in the fabric, just enough to bring him back for a second. I smoothed the envelope flat against my knee, took a breath, and opened it. My darling Margaret, if you're reading this, I'm already gone, but don't think for 1 second that means you're alone. I've seen how strong you are, even when you don't see it in yourself. The letter wasn't long. He told me I was his greatest home, that even in his absence I carried everything we built. He said he knew there might be pressure, and he wanted me to remember that I never had to ask permission to stay rooted. He reminded me of the first time we painted the kitchen together, of how I danced barefoot on the tile while he made a mess with the roller. He told me to keep dancing. You bend, but you don't break. You never have, you never will. By the time I finished reading, tears were rolling down my cheeks, not heavy, broken sobs, just quiet drops of something finally released. I folded the letter back along its creases and held it to my chest. The room didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full of all the things he left behind that didn't need to be seen to be felt. Thank you, I whispered into the dark, for knowing me better than I knew myself. That night, I slept with the letter beside my pillow, and for the first time in months, I didn't dream of endings. I dreamed of beginnings. The air was soft that evening, touched with the smell of cut grass and blooming jasmine. Olivia and I sat on the patio, our plates empty, the light fading to lavender across the backyard. She nudged my shoulder and said the house still drives her mom crazy. I laughed, a real full laugh that shook loose something inside me. It felt good to let it out, like dust brushing off an old chair finally sat in again. I looked out at the garden, the one Robert planted with such care, and let the quiet settle between us. I had bent more than once, but I hadn't broken. Not when they whispered behind closed doors. Not when they tried to move me like a pawn. The world doesn't always protect you. Sometimes you have to build your own guardrails, one choice at a time. And sometimes it takes losing what you love to find the strength you forgot was yours. Olivia looked over, her face lit in the last gold of the sun, and asked if I ever regretted staying. I told her no, not once, because in this house I had loved, fought, remembered, and reclaimed every inch of myself. Maybe that's what we're really here for. Not to hold on to everything forever, but to know when to stand, when to stay, and when to say, this is mine, and I'm not letting go.